Hi everyone, I wanted to do a video today on the difference between the baby steps and the financial independence retire early movement and how it can help you. I think there is value in both. So if you like this kind of content at some point, please like and subscribe. It sure helps the channel out. So I'm going to do this as a two-part series. First of all, going over the baby steps, and I'm going to give you practical advice of what we did in these scenarios and just my real life experience. I have done both and continue to do both, and it's not something like you do and it's over. These are habits and ways of living your life that like you don't really ever stop doing. You just kind of have to 2 steps forward, sometimes 1 step back. So that's one thing I would say about doing the baby steps, and these are the Dave Ramsey baby steps. And I know some of you are probably familiar with Dave Ramsey, and some of you may not have ever heard of Dave Ramsey. So he is a financial speaker. His predecessor was Larry Burkett. He's not the only person I listen to, but he has kind of codified these techniques and tricks, tips and habits in a way that speaks to a lot of people. I used to work in the health club industry, and there were those trainers that were like more militaristic and those that were kinder. And some people need that kind of military type, do this, you piece of dirt, under my shoe kind of a force to get them motivated. And I feel like he is that. I don't like that about him. However, I do recognize that some people need that kind of toughness that he gives. So let's talk about the baby steps, and I'll give you practical application and also what I think about it. So the first one is create an emergency fund. And I think it is crucial, and I think this is one area where people get into so much trouble because they'll say, I can't. And the first opposition to doing something is believing that you can't. So creating an emergency fund, he used to say $500 for a single person, $1,000 for a couple. And that I believe he still sticks to even with inflation. And the truth is, most emergencies are going to cost you somewhere between $400 and $1,000, and they're not really emergencies. They're just life. They become emergencies when you don't have the money to pay for them. So have a yard sale, sell stuff on Facebook Marketplace, drive for Uber, babysit, get out there, mow some lawns, clean some gutters, do something, and get that $1,000 emergency fund. Or just simply, if you are a high income earner or you have enough income, save that money, quit spending until you get it. I did this by generally it was having yard sales and to quit spending and taking any kind of unexpected money or tax refunds that would come in and putting that aside. So it was life-changing to have that money. And eventually it became like, you have tires coming up, so I learned to plan for tires or brakes or whatever. Those things aren't really emergencies, but in the beginning, when we're not planning for them, they feel like emergencies because they really set us back. So having an emergency fund, and when you deplete it, refilling it is really important. And these days, it shouldn't be that hard with all the things we can do now with our apps and our phone to earn money. The next one is to pay off debt. So the first step in the emergency fund usually takes people about a month to 2 months to do. The second step, and these are just statistics, usually takes 2 to 3 years, up to 5 years on average. And so for me, I got out of debt 3 times. And part of the reasoning of that is I was married. We got out of debt because of, we got out of debt. I'm not going to go into the because of. Some things happened. We were able to get out of debt. We got back in debt with the house, and my ex-husband had some spending problems, and I was codependent. And long story short, we got out of debt. I got out of debt again when we divorced. And then when I while I was a single mom, I had a car through my business that was still my car. I owned the business, and I had that, and we had our mortgage. So that was the only debt we had. So when I met my now husband, I was 40, I'm 52. We went through Dave Ramsey together. He took care of his debts that he had before we would get married. I paid off my car in 2016. And then in 2017, I paid my car off, and then we paid our mortgage off in March of last year of 2022. So completely debt-free, and paying off the house is actually down the list, but we have been completely debt-free. And the way that we did it was mostly earning extra money doing side work. So I feel like I have beat this horse to death on here, but that's not a very good phrase, is it? Especially from a horse owner. I beat this to death, but my husband and I, my side hustle was that I taught yoga classes. What I did was I just took it a step further. I ended up being a trainer. I taught workshops. I taught school. I trained yoga teachers. I wrote a book. There wasn't a whole lot of money in that. I do get some money off of that, but the royalties are pretty small. Most authors, unless they're bestsellers, and that's only like less than 1% of people who write books, they're not making a lot, maybe a couple $100s a year. So I make a few $100s a year, up to $1,000 a year doing that, but it's generally not a lot. So worked extra, whether it was back in the day before I became a yoga teacher, it was babysitting and cleaning houses, keeping people's pets. It's kind of your standard side hustle stuff, or what we would just call second jobs. Then after you get your debt paid off, it's a 3 to 6 month emergency fund. And I honestly kind of did these together because I felt like I needed a 3 to 6 month emergency fund as a single mom. So I paid off debt while building a 3 to 6 month emergency fund. And I just needed that security. Everyone's different. And the way I looked at it, like, let's say some money came in, I earned some extra money, and let's say I had $600. I've talked about this extensively. I would put $200 towards the debt, $200 towards savings, and $200 towards, like, it might be fun, or it might be kids' clothes, or whatever was needed. I tried to always have some fun with my kids, whether it was taking them to get something to eat, or taking them on a small vacation every year when I was a single parent, or sometimes when there was a little extra money. If there was an extra $200, I had 4 kids, I would say I have $50 per kid to spend on you right now, and I would get them something that they needed. So I did a simultaneous thing, and that, I think, for me and my personality, that worked. And it took me about 3 years after my divorce to get completely out of debt. And I had $11,000 on a vehicle. This was back in 2011. It took me about 3 years. I had $11,000 on a vehicle. I think I had about $7,000 on a credit card from where we had put windows in our house, and some things we did to our house before we got divorced. And I had $5,000 I had to pay to the lawyer. So I paid all of that off in 3 years while being on a low income. During that time, I was averaging about $30,000 a year, plus that included my alimony, which didn't last for very long, and my child support, which was only on, at that time, only on 2 children. And in Arkansas, it wasn't much. So even with that, it was still about $42,000 a year. So with 4 teenagers at home. The next thing, number 4, is to invest a 15% or 10 to 15% match. So I wasn't able to do this until later, but I had done it when we were married. We always got the match, and my ex-husband we kind of had an agreement that he would be the breadwinner, and I would take care of the children and the house and all of that, and work part-time. So the 401k in our situation, we never considered it yours or mine. It was ours. And that was a conscious decision on our part. And we shoveled all of our money. Anytime there was a raise, we would put a portion of that raise into the 401k. We made sure we got the match always, first and foremost, and then increased it slowly. We were never maxing it out, but because we started at 29 and 30, by the time we got divorced at 40 and 41, it had grown pretty substantially, and that was through the 2008 recession. It did drop in half and came back, so I still never regret that we put our money in there. Even though we were living paycheck to paycheck, we were doing that. So it was really good. So I had that money. It never really grew. I would put a little bit into it as I could, maybe $50, $100 a year. It wasn't really helping me as far as tax optimization because I did have the kids, But what I did was, as I paid stuff off, I started diverting it into investments. As the kids got through college and all of that, we'll talk about that in a minute, I would put a little bit more in there as I made a little bit more. I wasn't able to put more than like $2,500 a year in there until the past few years, but it has still made a significant impact, especially for me. And I'll talk about this when we talk about financial independence, when I took it out of the hands of a broker and I started managing it myself with low cost index funds. And I use Vanguard. Schwab and Fidelity are also good. Okay. The next one is college hacking, or not college hacking. We'll talk about college hacking next, but so then save for your kids' college. So you get your emergency fund, you pay off your debt, you got your 3 to 6 month emergency fund built up. So you're probably around 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road. That sounds really overwhelming to some people and it can feel like a slog, but trust me, you can get there and it feels so good. Celebrate along the way. If you have kids, and I won't go too much into depth on this because I'll get a little bit more, but I'll tell you what we did. My ex-husband and I worked at a community college, and our children, 2 of our children went through the path where you could take AP classes and get your first year of college in high school. Another child went through a technical program where you go to technical school while you're in high school, and you get that part of that is taken care of. So when my children went to college, they got their 2-year degrees for free, and because we were divorced, they qualified for Pell Grants. So not only did my children go to school for free, they had Pell Grant money, and that paid for their books, and then they were able to use that money to live on while they were in school. I let them live at home, but I did make them pay for their car insurance, their gas, and their spending money and their cell phone. They did have that Pell Grant money. It was significant enough to afford that and more, and I wanted them to have some skin in the game, and none of them has bemoaned me for that at all. So I'm very proud that they were able to get their first 2 years of college. My daughter ended up only having a small amount of school loans. One of my boys went on to get his master's degree, actually 2 master's degrees. He graduates next month, and he has inherited quite a lot more, or not inherited, he has taken on quite a lot more debt. But we've talked about it along the way and been very consciously discussing how that's going to impact him, and he is very much following the FIRE movement. So I think he'll be fine. All right. He's a hard worker and really smart with his money overall, and a saver. Number 6 is pay off the house. So we paid off the house. I was 51 when we paid off the house, and my husband was 63. That was a very conscious choice when we moved, and we got a less expensive house than we could afford per what the bank would loan us. As you get older, I would consciously begin to think about that. If you're in a modest house that you can pay off and you want to stay there, great. If you're in the big family home and you don't need it anymore, consciously think about how you can reduce those expenses. It reduces not only your mortgage payment, but your taxes, all your insurance, everything is less, your repairs, when you don't have a huge house. Plus, you just don't need it. Now, in our case, we have a farm. My husband is a cowboy. He used to be a bareback bronco rider. And, it is a lot, but we only have to pay taxes, insurance, and upkeep. And while that is more than I would like to spend, it is about a quality of life. And we have discussed even maybe downsizing even more to less land eventually, or building on part of our land and selling part of our land. I don't know if we'll do that, but we'll see. Okay. If you pay off your house before you retire, you're going to need a whole lot less to live on. And that is awesome. Think about what it would be like if you didn't have to pay a mortgage. Our mortgage was $1,240 a month, I think. And to not have to pay that every month has really increased our savings and investments rapidly. It made a huge difference. It's such a psychological win. I wouldn't trade it for the world. The next one is to give. And I have just been kind of giving along the way. And I'd like to share this as my final thought. My next video will be on the pillars of financial independence. But along the way, my pastor, I was really involved in my church all the years my kids were growing up. Not so much now. I'm not going to get into the details of why. But He was awesome. And, you know, I didn't have a lot of money. So what I did have was the time, and I could bring my kids with me. So I used to cook on Wednesday nights in the church kitchen. I kept children. I taught Sunday school to children and adults. I worked on the missions committee. I took my children to do local mission work. We worked at soup kitchens. We went to hospitals and food banks, and we did all kinds of things when they were growing up. And he told me that sometimes we have our time or talents to give, and sometimes we have money to give. I didn't have money to give back then, but I also have helped my family quite a lot. I have a son that's disabled, and I do quite a lot for him. I try to also help my family. My parents are getting older. I do what I can for them. And then I now look for ways that I see a need. There's also a local food bank in my area that I give to regularly. So I now have a little bit more money. I do have a little bit more time now, but it's focused mostly on family. And I have a huge family. Between us, we have 6 kids, 5 grandkids, 2 of them about to be born. We have now son and daughter-in-laws and all of that. So our family's gotten huge, and there's always someone who needs help. And I figured that while there are really needy people in the world, I can write checks for that. But in my own family, I want to see them thrive, and I want to have good, kind, loving human beings, children and grandchildren. And I think that's one of the best gifts we can give to the world. So giving of our time, our talent, or our financial means is important. And this is the point where a lot of people go through this process, and they're there in about 7 to 10 years, or maybe even 3 to 5. Some people get really gung-ho and they start to be like, now what? And that's what happened to me at the kind of when I had the emergency fund and all of that. I found the financial independence movement, and it gave me a map of how to do things even in a more detailed way. And so my next video will be on the pillars of financial independence and how we implemented those pillars into our life. And here's the last thing I say. If you want to learn to do something, find people who have done it and emulate those steps. The chances are you're not that different. You might have some minor things going on that are going to change, but that is what I did. I looked at people who had did it, and I thought, what can I emulate? My life isn't exactly like them, but there are certainly things I could learn. So thank you so much for being here. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.